Bastrop, Texas is well known for its rich history, natural beauty, and an authentic vibe that you just can't find anywhere else. The City of Bastrop is proud to bring you Overheard at City Hall, a podcast aimed at bringing you, our community, inside the walls of City Hall to get to know the hardworking men and women of the City of Bastrop who wake up every day to serve you, our citizens. Join us as we discuss the many topics that on any given day may be overheard at City Hall.
Hello, Bastrop. Welcome to another episode of Overheard at City Hall. That's the official podcast of the City of Bastrop. And today we're going to be talking about all things city finances and city budget with Chief Financial Officer Tracy Waldron. How you doing, Tracy?
I'm good.
All right, so we're going to start off with you talking a little bit about yourself, what your job entails, and how long you've been doing it.
Okay, so Chief Financial Officer, pretty much everything finance, everything money. I've been doing it 9 years now. I've been working for the City of Bastrop for 9 years. I've been the Chief Financial Officer for the last 6.
Right.
I was assistant before that.
Okay.
But it also includes some interesting other departments like municipal court. I supervise, utility billing, and the cemetery, which is always very interesting.
That's right. That was a little bit new for me when I came here, that the finance department is as involved with the management of Fairview Cemetery, the city-owned and maintained cemetery here in Bastrop. Right, and so if someone wants to purchase a cemetery plot from the city cemetery, they visit with the City of Bastrop Finance Department.
They do.
Right? Who takes very good care of them and makes sure their needs get met. That's exactly right. And there's a city council appointed advisory board that oversees the operation of the cemetery, and you're the principal liaison with them as well. Right. Really, really good stuff. All right. So, but more traditionally, when we think about you and your job, especially this time of year, we think about the budget, right? And at the time we're filming this podcast, the council still hasn't quite voted on the budget yet. They'll be doing that probably before this podcast is aired. But the budget discussions, I think, have gone really well. We had one budget workshop where they made a few adjustments toward the end. But overall, I think a very positive process. I think the city council was pleased with it. I'd like for us to spend some time talking about process. I think the more people understand how the budget process works and how decisions are made, the more comfort they have with that. And also, if they're not so comfortable with the outcomes, it speaks to how they can achieve different outcomes if the public wants to insert themselves into it. So let's talk a little bit about that budget process and how that works in Bastrop.
Okay. So normally, I would say we do it all year round, but in January, we kind of kick off.
Right.
We have a meeting with the department directors where we can talk about their priorities, their issues, their concerns, their projects, the challenges, and then in March we pretty much start taking requests, and they start actually working on putting their information in. We use a base budget, so we basically start with the previous budget as kind of a baseline, and then they submit requests for concerns and needs. But I would say all along the way, we're hearing council and we're hearing priorities. We know their focus areas. But in May, we actually do have a budget workshop that brings to council a lot of information. This year we brought the capital budget, which was a 5-year plan, and talked through all of those projects with them. We brought department requests and priorities that we see are necessary, new staffing. We are focusing on trying to upgrade our equipment. And so all along the way, we're communicating with council the available funds that we feel like that we have out there, and these are the things that we want to talk to them about. So because we have that meeting and because we put all that out up front, when we actually do give them the proposed budget, there are really no surprises at that point.
Terrific job. What you just went over had a lot of important concepts and key words in it, and I'm going to want us to back up a little bit and flesh some of that out. And so in summary here, there's a lot of internal staff work that starts in January. We formally get the city council involved in what we did last year, and what I think is a really good, effective, recurring calendar approach to all of this is a springtime, and we focused on May, a springtime pre-budget planning session is what we call it. And so, and to work ahead real quickly, the fiscal year's in October. Council doesn't vote on the budget until September. We're in September now. Council's about to vote. So backing up several months before we ask them to vote in May at that pre-budget planning session, we try to present enough good information to them that they can react to and give me and you a good direction, so that when I'm actually formally proposing a budget to them in July or August, as you said, there are no surprises. Right? So we're not talking specifics so much in May. We're not presenting to them a proposed budget with all of the numbers tied up and it's all wrapped up with a nice tidy bow like we like to do later on in the summer. And you mentioned a couple of things that we try to do at that pre-budget planning session, and one is the CIP. And growing community, lots of demands on our critical infrastructure, and I've had other podcast discussions with people like Curtis Hancock and Trey Jobe where we dove into that in more detail. And one of the things we're trying to do a better job of here, and reorganized around, hired a new person, the director of engineering and project management, who I ought to interview on a podcast sometime, Fabiola De Carvalho, to actually put together that 5-year capital plan. And for the first time, I think in a few years, in May, we've said, okay, council, not just next year's capital projects, but looking 5 years out, water, wastewater, roads, drainage, parks. Here's what we're looking at in terms of pretty significant potential capital expenditures. And the other thing we do in May, and I think this is key to success, is we show them a fiscal forecast. So why don't you describe what we try to include in those fiscal forecasts for the general fund and the other major funds?
Yeah, so in the fiscal forecast, we're looking 5 years out as well.
Right.
And we're making some assumptions and some projections on revenue.
Right.
And we're also looking at, on the expense side, for instance, with general fund, what might be dropping off or what might be coming on.
Right.
New positions, new projects, new departments. So we're basically just, it's an estimate, but it's an educated estimate.
Well, a key word you use there is assumptions. Yes. Right. And that's what we're trying to communicate to council. Council, here's what we think the basic affordability picture is for the general fund for the next 5 years. Here's where we might be in good shape. Here's where we may not be in such great shape. And it's all based on assumptions. Here's what we assume will happen with the tax base. Here's what we assume, best estimate based on data we have, will happen with sales tax revenues, right? And on the expense side too, here's what we think we might see needing to happen with capital projects, for example, that we'll want to fund both with debt or with cash, current revenues. And so we lay all that out. Right. And so for an example, for one of our major operating funds, the BPNL, the electric fund, we said, hey, and it was the fiscal forecast. Council, we're okay now from a cash perspective, but unless we do something different, right, in the next few years, we won't be.
Right.
We won't be balanced in the electric fund unless, and actually, we weren't suggesting to council that they make any immediate decisions there
Right.
for fiscal 22, but within that 5-year planning horizon, we may need to either significantly reduce expenses or effect a rate increase. Right? So that helps. Something I say a lot is short-term decisions have long-term implications, and we try to quantify that and show a picture of that in the fiscal forecast.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you, because when I got here, I said, hey, Tracy, we need to create these fiscal forecasts. And you were terrific. You said, well, I've got all the data. And so pulling it together wasn't as hard as it might have been. What we hadn't been doing so much is presenting the summary of all that to the city council. Right. Okay. So we had that all-day session with the city council in May. We talked about the comprehensive plan, we talked about the CIP, we talked about the fiscal forecast, we talked about some priorities that the city staff saw for the next fiscal year, and we presented all that, and then we listened, and council said, thank you, here's what we think are important to us. And they gave us some really good direction on where we head with some things, right? And we took all that and we prepared a budget. We presented that budget to council in July, and then we had one budget workshop, right? So let's talk about the fiscal 22 budget and some of those major initiatives. What do we want people to know about this fiscal 22 budget that's different from prior fiscal years?
Well, different. We do have some new positions in this budget.
Yep.
They were much needed positions that were filling some gaps in services and customer service and enforcement, couple of positions in planning. But we're focusing more on street maintenance and streets. There's bond issuance proposed in the budget.
Right.
There are fund balances being used for that purpose. There's also a focus on fleet and equipment replacement.
Excellent point.
And so
Thank you.
we have some outdated equipment that needs to be replaced. And so as much as we had fund balance available, we are, getting that equipment updated and replaced.
Yeah.
We're also, it doesn't really change money as much, but we are looking at a different approach with the fleet, and we're looking at doing leased vehicles for the police. And so this is a new process. The money is still the same as far as how we were handling that payment, but it's a new concept. So I'm looking forward to how we've had a lot of maintenance issues with the police fleet, and so we're hoping that this is going to help with that.
Yeah, I just this weekend I ran into one of our officers on patrol. He was in the neighborhood, and I was out doing yard work, and he pulled over and he stopped, and so I started asking him about the vehicle he was driving, several years old, a lot of miles. He wasn't complaining. He said, well, as a matter of fact, it broke down on me just this morning. And so when you talk to Chief Nagy and talk to Chief Stefanik about, hey, okay, what is it we need to do better to resource you guys? And well, the general age and condition of the fleet was number one on their list. And so, so kudos to you and for Assistant Chief Stefanik for looking into that leasing model that several cities in the area, we're not the first ones to dip our toe into this. The city I was in before this city, we did it, not just for fleet, but for all light-duty vehicles. And, real benefits. Benefits in terms of immediate cash flow. and frankly, over the life of a vehicle, you're not really saving money on that vehicle, leasing it versus purchasing it.
Right.
What you are getting are some immediate cash flow benefits, but even more significantly, what comes with the deal is this automated maintenance program,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, so they manage the maintenance.
They manage the maintenance, make sure we get good costs, good prices for all of that, and it comes with it the system that we can avail ourselves of keeping track of the vehicle's maintenance needs, because we have been struggling in that regard.
Yeah, so one of the things that they were able to quantify is the number of hours that
Right.
was just spent dealing with the fleet issue, and so we're going to get all those hours back.
And maintenance costs.
Yeah.
Right. So I think some short-term fiscal benefits associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. You also mentioned new positions in the planning department, and we talk about the city's planning department a lot. And when we report on this, I think very responsibly to the city council about just what the workload demand is on the city's planning department with all the growth, which I think paints a picture not only of the workload, but what a good job the department's doing in responding to it. We do worry just how sustainable that is. And you mentioned the word gaps. A significant gap is on the code enforcement side. That's been an issue the city council identified for me. Actually, they identified it when I was a candidate. They asked about all that, and so we're now to the position where we can help with that, and also we're providing some administrative resources too.
Yes.
So, what other positions are we adding? Put you on the spot.
Yeah, I know. Let me try to wheel back and remember.
There were 6 total.
There were some police positions.
Right.
So there was a
Yep.
real issue in the criminal investigation department.
Mm-hmm.
So we are adding a lieutenant and we are adding another
Detective. Right.
Because they were hours.
4,000 hours.
Yeah, 4,000 hours out on investigated.
It's
So,
amazing. And I get reports every week from the chief that includes how many new cases come in versus how many cases are resolved. And without any variance to this, every week they're adding more cases than they're able to resolve. And our detectives are just swamped.
Right.
And that's not just that doesn't just impact workload. That hinders their ability to provide good service to the victims.
Right.
And that causes a backlog that affects patrol too. So we're not adding any patrol positions for fiscal 22. Right. The chief says at this point we're able to maintain our response times, which are actually pretty impressive, and we report on that too. Where he really needed the help was detectives.
So there's another position in fire. We are
Right.
adding a daytime shift.
Yep.
So that's going to be very helpful
Yes.
in their response times.
Much needed, and this city has done such a great job of responding to our fire protection needs, not just thinking about the 10-year anniversary of the complex fire and all of the methods and the procedures that I interviewed Chief Rosales at a prior podcast where he did a good job of articulating all that. But a priority of mine has been the chief and the assistant chief are depended on here for making fire calls.
Right.
Way more than they ought to be. They've got other jobs too, and so adding that daytime firefighter, which corresponds to where we get the majority of calls,
Right.
so that Andreas and Eric aren't the guys running out of City Hall, hopping on a truck and actually responding. To add that third paid firefighter to the shift element, I think will be great.
Yes.
So a total of 6 positions added to the expense picture.
Mm-hmm.
We were able to present a tax rate to the city council that didn't raise the actual tax
Right.
rate. But tax revenues are going up, property tax
Yes.
revenue because of appraisals. You want to talk through how that formula works a bit?
So we actually are accepting the same nominal rate this year.
Right.
But it consists of an M&O rate, which is what funds our general fund.
Right.
That rate is actually going down slightly this year.
Yep.
And a debt rate, which is going up a little bit. So the mix of the two rates are shifting, but the total rate is the same.
Right.
But we are seeing an increase. I think it's 13% if I'm pulling out of my memory, about 700, a little over 700,000 we're gaining, and that's just because values have increased all across everything, land, residential, all, property, commercial, everything has increased. And so, there is a benefit to
Right.
the city on those values going up.
Right. So, and one of the things we can do in the editing of this podcast is overlay a chart, a particular chart we provided to the city council is, as a result of this proposed budget, what is the impact on the average Bastrop property tax payer?
Right.
And help me with these numbers too. The average valued structure with this new certified assessment roll is $226,000, I think. And so if you are the hypothetical, theoretical owner of that house, you're going to pay $95 more in property taxes next fiscal year than you did last fiscal year. And you said something important. Our tax rate by state law is divided into two components. One is the O&M, or operations and maintenance rate, that pays for salaries and equipment and that sort of thing. And the other is for debt.
Right.
And you made quick reference to this, but I want to flesh it out. The O&M rate, the operations and maintenance rate, is actually going down.
Correct.
As a function of the values going up. The debt rate is going up because we plan to issue $3.6 million in debt this next fiscal year for street rehabilitation work.
Correct.
Not just the annual out of the operating budget street maintenance work that we do our overlay and crack sealing and chip sealing with, which is about $600,000 a year, I think. What we are falling behind on is more intense street rehabilitation work, and so $3.6 million will help us in that regard for next year. And what we've also said to council, and this is part of that 5-year forecasting and capital planning stuff we've talked about, is we've targeted a November of 23 bond issuance, right? Or a bond authority to be approved that would include significant funds for street reconstruction. I tell people a lot, it's the truth, when people ask me, well, what's the number one complaint you hear from citizens? And it's about the quality of Bastrop's streets, and we're to the point where a significant percentage of those streets just need to be rebuilt, torn up and rebuilt. And no, we don't have the funding for that just yet, but that's what that bond election would be for.
Well, and we also have in this budget the study to look at the pavement conditioning index, and so that will be used as a guide to prioritize those streets and which ones would be a part of that bond.
Right, and so I did suggest to council that if you get asked a question from a constituent, hey, why didn't, with all the appraised values going up, why weren't you able to reduce our tax rate? A very true and simple answer to that question is, well, we could have, except we decided to bolster the debt rate a bit so that we could do more street rehabilitation work. Otherwise, we could have reduced the nominal rate. And I know this podcast is running longer than they typically do, but there's a couple of other things I wanted to cover in, I think, this important set of subjects. You just mentioned the paving condition index that we think we need to update in fiscal 22. There's some pretty significant other study efforts in that we hope to accomplish with the fiscal 22 work plan funded with the budget. And one of those is a parks master plan. We are hoping that that's essentially funded by a grant, and that's what the budget assumes.
Right.
But that's a big initiative for next year, and I think people might be interested. Fiscal 22 will be a planning year for the future of how we handle parks and recreation in Bastrop, and that parks master plan will be what informs those decisions. Questions about, do we create a real parks and recreation department in Bastrop? That's ultimately a city council decision, but we're going to be going through a planning effort on that next year, which I know a lot of people are interested in, and I thought I'd want to highlight that. So you are the proud annual recipient, you in your department on behalf of the city, of the Government Finance Officers Association Budget Award,
Yes.
which is not to be taken for granted. I think about 5% of Texas cities achieve that award. And if it's not 5%, it's awfully close to it. It's been a few months since I've looked at that statistic. Tell us, what does that mean, and why should Bastrop citizens feel good about that? What does that do for us?
Yeah. So the award, to get the award, you have to have put certain things in your budget book, and a lot of those come from just having clear transparency, having stated goals and objectives and strategies, and so it's really not just about going through the checklist and saying, oh, we have this, we have this, we have this. If we have all those things, we actually have a document that is helpful to our citizens and gives them
readability,
great information.
Right.
It gives them detail of every fund and every department, but it also ties each one of those back to the focus areas of council. And so in getting that award just means that we have a robust book that gives a lot of information to our citizens.
And a picture of what it is we're trying to accomplish, and what the
Right.
city council is trying to accomplish with the budget. And actually, you may not be able to go into our budget document and see, quote unquote, line item
Right.
detail, right? That's available. But what the budget document as a policy document is a statement about what our policy objectives are. What is it we're trying to accomplish? And kudos to you for getting that award, and to prior city management and city councils for thinking that way. Not every community does that. So we promised at the beginning of this podcast we would talk a little bit about how people can affect the process. And at one level, there's public hearings that we hold on the tax rate, on the budget, right? Very frankly, not many people show up for that. And I don't know why that is. And I'd like to think it's because they have confidence in what we're doing. I'm not sure if that's the only answer. Right? If somebody wanted to set up a time to visit with you and say, hey, I don't understand how the budget works, or I've got a particular question, or I've got a concern that maybe we're not putting enough resources into XYZ, could they come talk to you?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you would open the books?
Door,
and
I would open the budget book
Right.
and walk them through, answer their questions.
Yeah. I personally enjoy those kinds of discussions. Let us know what we're missing.
Right.
Or if there's something you just don't understand that we can help explain. State law doesn't make any of this easy.
Right.
In terms of the kind of restrictions that are put on how we calculate things, how we report things. And ironically, I think it's all done in the name of transparency, but okay, sometimes it takes us to, okay, this is what this really means
Right.
to explain, which, thank you. You're always very happy to do. So, Tracy, it's a pleasure to work with you. I say this all the time. I've been around a lot of finance departments. This finance department cranks out a ton of work per person. And so it's a great place to work. Your team seems to really enjoy working with you. So thanks for your leadership and your supervisory skills in that regard. And I'm looking to another bunch of years. I mean, this last year, I thought for my first year going through the budget process went great. And so thank you for all that.